So this next part is really going to talk about 3 steps along what we call the backwards design and course design process. We're going to first talk about writing intended learning outcomes, but specifically how you might consider adding a global learning outcome to your already designed set of learning outcomes in your course. We're going to talk about assessment, specifically talking about designing some sort of collaborative group project in your COIL course, and then we're going to talk about designing for learning materials and activities that can help guide students towards meeting their assessment needs. In the backwards design process, just to give a little bit of an overview of this, if this isn't new to you, the first real goal of writing learning outcomes is really identifying what do I hope students will have learned that will still be there and have value several years after they take your course. In determining the assessment, we're really asking the question on what would the students have to do to convince me and themselves that they had achieved those learning goals. And then when we're thinking about the learning activities and the materials, what would students need to do during the course to be able to do well on these assessment activities? So this just gives you a little bit of an overview into what that design process looks like. And first thinking about the intended learning outcomes, again, we're just focusing on what are the skills, the knowledge, or the attributes you intend students will develop by doing COIL in your course. So these might be added to the learning outcomes you already have about the content that they're supposed to learn and the way they're applying the content through COIL. These next couple of slides are talking about what some of those global learning outcomes might focus on. So this comes from the American Association of Colleges and Universities in the States. This was developed by a group of, I think, 16 or 17 universities to kind of determine what are some of our national or international outcomes or domains or competencies that students can learn that focus on global or international learning. They define global learning as the process of diverse people collaboratively analyzing and addressing complex issues that transcend borders. So again, this has to be done in some sort of collaboration across nations and across through different institutional partnerships. So this first set of domains focuses on global self-awareness, personal and social responsibility, perspective taking, cultural diversity, global systems, and knowledge application. This shouldn't be new. I talked about some of these earlier when we were kind of focusing on what the foundations of COIL might offer. So all of these tend to apply to a lot of COIL experiences, but figuring out the right ones for your course and the way that you're going to have students engage can be done by thinking about those learning outcomes. Don't know why that did that, but that was fun. So one way to do this is they offer this rubric, and this rubric is available as a PDF in that QR code to the Wakelet I sent you. So again, you'll have access to this later. And this is a lot of words on here, but essentially this rubric breaks up each one of those competencies and offers some different ways or that students might reach these. I will say this is used in an undergraduate context, but I think it can be applied to graduate or postgraduate programs as well, especially if you're thinking about what they might do in an undergraduate setting, maybe in a benchmark way, and some ways that they might be able to accomplish some of these competencies later on through some sort of capstone or cumulative learning experience. So this rubric can really help you in thinking about how you might get students to meet some of these competencies. There's 2 versions of these. So I'll show you the second version here, but I did want to highlight some different examples of what some of these learning outcomes might be for the competencies. So the first one, you might have students analyze, this is the psychology context, but how psychological findings are culturally mediated. So this might be focusing on that perspective-taking domain. Second example, you might have students identify and then apply appropriate business models, this is a business class, for introducing more sustainable food product packaging across diverse international markets. So this is really focusing on that knowledge application competency that they highlighted. The last one, you might have students analyze cultural components. This is the cultural diversity competency, and forming approaches to solving mathematical equations in order to apply this technique during class and beyond. If you are brand new to writing learning outcomes, at the very end of the slide deck, I have a few resources to kind of help guide the process. I think we use some specific language in determining what outcomes might look like, and so I've got some language there to support you. But this is just an example of how you might write an outcome that's specific to some of those global competencies. The second set from AAC&U focuses a little bit more on intercultural agility or more competency-based learning outcomes. So this includes things like empathy, curiosity, openness, knowledge of cultural worldview or frameworks, cultural self-awareness, or verbal and nonverbal communication. This is another rubric that directly applies to those specific competencies here, so then you can also see kind of what growth might look like in each competency and how your course might fit into that and what some learning outcomes might derive from that. So I've got a couple examples here of those ones. So students might be reflecting on how culture shapes their own and others' worldviews, values, and behavioral norms. So this is looking at that cultural self-awareness competency. Another example might be you're having students identify the potential difficulties or problems in intercultural communication. So this is looking at that verbal and nonverbal communication. I also want to point out that some of these learning outcomes might apply to multiple competencies, and that's great too. I think sometimes we write really big learning outcomes and then we've got to edit them down to figure out what it is we actually want students to gain from our experience. So this is showing some more succinct examples. The last example here, have students practice newly acquired skills in an active and cross-cultural learning environment for understanding. That's that empathy key. So you might be able to see how some of these might easily be able to apply to many different content areas or contexts of your course. So oftentimes I recommend coming up with one outcome that you can add to your already existing outcomes that focus on content that really brings in what are they learning through the COIL exchange, the activities that they're doing in COIL, the collaborative learning pieces they're doing in COIL, that they can walk away after your course many years down the road and say, oh, I took this course on psychology, but I partnered with a university in the United States that was an anthropology course, and I really learned about empathy when it came to that course. It had nothing to do with the course content, but my experiences in that course really led to a growth in empathy, which I can apply in my career, in my personal relationships, and beyond. So that's really what I wanted to focus on when it comes to learning outcomes. I pulled some language here from your COIL website here at the University of Glasgow when talking about learning outcomes. So you have the graduate attribute matrix, and there are some of those attributes on the left-hand side that you can pull from and identify within your content area to be able to come up with some of your learning outcomes that align to that as well. So you might use the ones that we provided from AAC&U, like empathy or curiosity, and then apply them to some of those that we're seeing here. I have this slide. Oh, here we go. So again, those are the 4 that the University of Glasgow has kind of identified as most applicable to COIL experiences, but there might be others in this list as well. Is there anything you want to add about this and how it? Okay, great. Before I move on to the assessment piece, are there any questions about the learning outcomes specific to a cultural or intercultural exchange? Great. So the next piece is talking about assessment. This is a really big piece, and I might speak a little bit out of order here because assessment might look differently at the University of Denver than it does here, so I'll invite Gabrielle to speak up and share, or for others to ask questions here. Again, I pulled this language directly from your website, so I'm going to read it here. But the COIL nature of the course may open up particular opportunities to use meaningful, iterative, and inclusive types of assessment as part of a programmatic approach to assessment and feedback. That's in line with the learning through assessment framework that I'm going to show here in a minute, and Gabrielle is going to speak a little bit more on. But when thinking about how you're going to assess students, you want to think about some different activities that can allow them to meet that assessment that then aligns back to those learning outcomes that you've identified in the course. I put a comment on here that you should be thinking about formative and summative assessments. There's a place for both of them, but COIL can really help in scaffolding their learning experiences to help them meet those assessments throughout the course. I have this one again here, I don't know But here is the learning through assessment framework that I'll let Gabriella speak a little more about.
Not much to say here that has been already said about this framework. And what I think is really important for us, especially because we are going through several reaccreditations, several curriculum mapping exercises, probably this is the best time to try to think how can we make, not just where we can do COIL, but how can we make that COIL planning and designing progressive, so that then what we are assessing in the first course, the COIL course, can contribute to learning for later on for our students. For example, for the MBDUC experience that we had, a student commented that although the course itself that we COILed did not necessarily have explicit global learning elements, because at the time we did not have all the guidelines or all the rubrics available, but she mentioned that she finally understood what is that difference in learning that is based on culture that then was taught in fourth year. So she had the opportunity to understand what was coming in the next year, and plus she said I also applied all the techniques that I learned for better communicating. There's not only verbal communication, and that's a course that they have done in first and second year. So she had the opportunity to apply skills that had learned in the first and second year within the third year COIL, and those then transfer later for the fourth year. So although we didn't plan for it, it was lucky for us, but what happened there is that through the framework, you can really see this progression if you plan through that progression, with maybe that build up also towards the criticality, the critical analysis aspect that we so much want for our students to acquire as an attribute. Okay, so the next few slides, we took them straight from the college presentation. So they're really just the same as that you have already access to. But they are within this context of COIL, so you might be, in your own time when you read them, you might be able then to relate to the rubrics, to relate to the experience, and if you go on the website, also to a lot of case studies that have been uploaded there. So there are all of them here, and we can just really move on, because otherwise we will stay here all day.
So I provided a list of a couple different examples of what assessments might look like. The big one really is the collaborative project that students are doing. This is going to be really context specific to your course and how you've designed assessments already and how students might be best assessed in your content area. But some of these examples could include essays, and those could be collaborative essays written between partners. Could be presentations, and oftentimes do include a presentation, even if they start with an essay. It could be literature reviews, creating some sort of artifact or deliverable of their learning experience. It could be some sort of applied learning. So the example I gave earlier of the mathematics and engineering group, they really got to work through some problem sets, and then they got to present on those problem sets. That allowed them to collaborate and work together, but then also come out at the end knowing the content and how to solve some of those problems. Often assessments are paired with meaningful reflections. This could be something they do throughout the COIL experience as some sort of learning journal where they're reflecting on the content that they're learning, but they're also reflecting on the experience of learning in collaboration with your COIL partner. Oftentimes, like Gabriella mentioned earlier, the comparative discussions is a way to get them to really work through the content and be prepared to complete some sort of assessment. A lot of the comparative discussions can include things like debates or book clubs, small group breakout room shares during a Zoom interaction, presentations, Q&A sessions with other expert lecturers, and even student-introduced topics. So it's a really great way for your partner group of students to bring in some of their knowledge, experience, and expertise, and your students to bring that as well and kind of create those centered around the students' values and ideas in relation to the content area of your course. Anyone else want to offer other assessment strategies here while we're sitting in this space and thinking about what it might look like in the context of your course?
Well, I still have to develop it, but it will be like a sort of a group work in which students do like a sort of mock interviews to each other, like replacing the people that work for a sustainable business, for example. And because it is difficult to find people available, they're working for companies and stuff, so I came up with this idea that they can actually interview each other, so prepare the questions, linking psychology to actual business, and instead another, so the assessment is like split in two parts, and the second part is actually developing a startup, a project for a startup, so in which they have to justify how psychology can be useful for sustainability.
I think those are great ideas.
Thank you.
I was thinking more I'm trying to think of the course materials that I've got for this year, and one might be collaborative computing or coding to make digital storytelling with Scratch or things like that, which you can actually match and you can do it asynchronously as well, which I think is going to be the main issue there. A co-authorship of a blog, podcast, radio emissions, things like that, for them to program and build the material. I'm just thinking about that active learning area. That might be just a few ideas. I've got to spin it around at the moment.
And I really like the idea of a podcast, and I want to comment on that because it brings up a point that Gabriella made earlier, in that you might not have students meeting synchronously every week at the same time, but they might coordinate a time that works for them to meet synchronously and record that podcast. Then they can share that with you and with the other students in your course, and that's a really great way to build in the synchronous interactions without having them as a part of your primary lecture meeting time. That's great.
One of the examples that we did during our COIL, that was the project within, there was a STEM project. So we had building your own sustainable house, but we built it through the different tasks. So we spoke about wind energy and solar energy, because these are the two renewable energies for the two countries. We had architects from the two countries involved to give the opportunity for that designing, because it was a STEM course. So at that point we had students who worked individually to produce a sketch of a sustainable house, first of all, and they had to describe the choices of material, the choices with justification by using Flipgrid. So it was a 1-minute video, and although they were working in groups, each individual of the group had to produce one video each. But then within the group, they had to feedback to each other on how to improve each other's video, like the prototype, through video feedback, because it was possible, through Flipgrid, or written feedback. At the end, the group had to make a collage of all individual best parts of the house. They made a collage. And finally, they had to build the house and make it work. So the point there was, if the solar panel is working, and the wind turbine model that we gave you is working, and the lights in the house are lighting up, and you are producing the design that you gave, and you're able to justify what material that design is made of, you have then matched the outcomes of that STEM task. And the actual prototype, which I have a couple of them in my room, those were presented in group. So that was our actual building. And Sandy, for example, was involved into giving them those literacy in STEM skills to be able to write their scripts, to be able to do that justification, to be able to then talk through. So it was really structured in a progressive manner.
Any others? Anyone? Great. So the last phase, when thinking about designing a course and specific to COIL, is designing those learning activities to get them towards the assessment. and to get them interacting, and to really emphasize why you're doing COIL in the first place, and how students can meet those learning outcomes. So you're creating opportunities to build community. That usually starts first, and those should be intentional. Gabriella talked about icebreakers. That's usually the easiest way to get them to open up. It should be very low stakes, but it should get them comfortable so that then they can begin working on the content with one another. You should consider ways to hold students accountable for their engagement. So your accountability with your students might look a lot different than your partner's accountability with their students. That's something you should talk about and make sure you're at least on the same page about what you expect from their students and vice versa. But making sure you build in those accountability opportunities throughout the exchange is really important. That might look like making sure students have roles, making opportunities throughout the exchange for them to submit components of their assessments, or maybe the learning journals, for example, that lets you know that they are in fact interacting, they are in fact getting something from the exchange, and you can iterate or adapt throughout the exchange if they're not meeting those accountability standards. You'll want to make sure you consider modality for every activity that you do. So I'm going to talk about that a lot, and I'll mention that in the third sort of presentation set here, because modality is really important and can have its own set of complications there as well. There's a lot of technology that we'll explore to facilitate these activities, but really the point of the learning activity is to prepare students for the assessments. I like to show this slide because I think this really captures what are the key characteristics of a successful COIL exchange, and this really emphasizes some of those interactions that students are going to have throughout the exchange. So first, the COIL is inherently student-centered. So it's not the teacher talking at the student. It's not inviting students from another university to listen to a lecture. There has to be something centered around the students interacting with one another. And through collaborative learning experiences. So not just talking about things, but maybe working on something together. That really emphasizes that collaboration piece. The interactions should be active, again, not passive, them sitting there listening to a lecture, but really engaging with the lecture or engaging with the content in a way that can help them really digest the material in your course, but then also do that with others. Usually, COIL is built around some sort of project or group work, and then there should be supports built in for the cross-cultural interactions. So you should figure out what supports your students might need to be successful. That might be around something like the language barrier. It might be something around using the technology. But then it also might be something around working with someone who comes from a different context than they're used to. Their communication patterns might be different in different cultures. So really figuring out how to support your students as they're experiencing the exchange when it comes to learning, but also just when it comes to being a human in those spaces as well. So this kind of, again, I just wanted to bring this one up again because this kind of brings in all of those elements that we've talked about when it comes to building teams, getting students comfortable working together, offering different opportunities for comparative discussions, working through some collaborative pieces when it comes to project work or problem solving, and wrapping up the COIL exchange with some deep reflection on what they've learned and what the experience was like for them while presenting that in some way. I have a couple examples here of some different activities that we see in COIL. So icebreakers, we see those in all COIL exchanges. That happens at the beginning. Comparative discussions here. So really those emphasize what students can learn about the social, political, or economic circumstances of their partner country, about the style of education of their partner institution as it relates to your course content. So it's really great that you're already kind of thinking about that. That can happen in courses, like I mentioned earlier, of the same content area, but there's some really unique ways to pair with partners that are outside of your content area but can bring some really relevant content to your students. This might look like, again, collaborative debates, fishbowl activities, or jigsaw activities. I can explain those if those are new terms to you. Digital annotations is what we see a lot. So earlier I mentioned this. There's a technology tool called Perusal. It's an open access free tool on the web that you can upload course readings to, and you can share that with students from both institutions, and then they can highlight and annotate those readings and leave comments to one another. So they can have completely asynchronous discussions directly related to those course readings. I mean, you can see that and you can interact with them there. I see that a lot in a lot of different COIL courses as the #1 way of getting students to interact with the content and with one another. And that can be done completely asynchronously, which is even better. Peer review is another one, and then sharing some sort of presentations, reflections, and feedback. Obviously, some activities work better in an asynchronous format, and some work better in synchronous formats. You can have these really sharpened out before you teach your course, or you can figure out how to offer optional ways for students to meet some of those. If you're designing your COIL specifically in an asynchronous way, but students might want some synchronous format, you can offer some optional ways for them to engage deeper. That might work for them, and vice versa. If it's primarily synchronous, but you want to make sure they have some asynchronous opportunities to engage, you can design that in there as well. In my next set of slides, I'm going to show you another resource for figuring out that part of the technology too as well.
Shall we take the break?
Really fast. Yours seems to be a little bit longer, and it sounds like others might be even longer than that. So figuring out the right time in the term, this also might be a reason that a partnership isn't right fit, if the term dates just can't match up. But finding a sweet spot in there that's at least 4 to 5 weeks, but might be able to extend longer than that. Or as Gabriella showed the diagram from Ashley earlier, you might meet for a week and have some interactions for 2 weeks, and then meet again and then not have some interactions. So it doesn't have to be consecutive, but figuring out within the term or academic calendar is really important. The 3 that my next couple slides are going to focus on, because I think these are a little bit more complex and have some more nuances: relationship building, technology considerations and limitations, and thinking about modality. So here's a list of some things that I think are really important to think about when you're building relationships with your partner. First and foremost, meet informally first. See if there's even some chemistry there. People like to make a lot of jokes about how finding a COIL partner is like online dating, and so it can be. So figuring out if it's going to work for you, and I think this is the case for a lot of collaborations, even within your own institution. There's people that you can work really, really well with, and there's people that there might just be a little bit more challenge with. So meeting informally to figure out if it's going to work. Sharing kind of your goals during some of those first few meetings, maybe what your teaching philosophy is and what it is not, kind of some of the things that you typically do in a course, some of the things you're interested in doing, talking about your own strengths and some areas that maybe aren't as strong for you and vice versa is really important. Creating an organized process for your collaboration. So sitting down and actually developing a timeline, both for the design and for teaching the course. So the design might take 3 months to work through with your partner just based on your schedules and your capacity and bandwidth. So really sitting down and being like, this is how long it's going to take us to figure out how we're going to do the COIL exchange, and then what that looks like. So really having clear meetings scheduled with agendas, sharing some meeting notes, having action items. Some of those things we already do in collaborations, but might be a little bit more complicated when you're doing it with a 7-hour time difference, and with someone from a different culture than you. Set realistic deadlines, and then again, converse about your own personal strengths and maybe areas that are not strong. Co-create expectations and goals. So really thinking about what co-creation looks like for you and your partner. They might have different goals than you. So we've heard a couple examples today where a lot of cultures, their primary goal is for them to practice English. And that's really great, but you want to make sure that your students are getting something valuable out of it too. So talking about what those goals are together, maybe coming up with some shared goals, even if you still have some different goals, is going to be important for you. So I would suggest answering some of these questions here for yourself first before even talking with the partner. What goals do you have for facilitating COIL? And then how will you navigate with your partner if their goals are different than you? So I like to talk about the difference between equitable and equal participation, because it might look differently, and that's okay, but figuring out how your students can have an equitable experience in your course through this COIL exchange. So it doesn't mean that everyone has to do things, every student has to do things in the same or equal way, but what's going to work best to make sure that they can meet those learning outcomes. Come on, Megan. In the best way. So really thinking about what that looks like. Often that looks like assigning students tasks. So I mentioned this earlier, but if you have small groups of students, give them, and there's 5 students, give them 5 different roles that they can sign up for, and then have them come up with the task list and what each person is going to do from that task list to make sure that there is that accountability built in, but make sure that students are able to participate in the way that works the best for them and for you. Revisit your goals, your timelines, and your accomplishments often. So don't just talk about this in the first meeting with your partner, but talk about it ongoing. And then build in opportunities for assessment and feedback and reflection. So check in with your partner. How's it going? What are some things that we could improve? What are some things that are going really well? And then check in with your students. How is the COIL experience going? What are some things that we can improve? What are some things that are going really well? I always advocate for some sort of mid-experience check-in. So midway through the COIL, check-in, have opportunities for students to share that with you and maybe with your partner as well. And then at the end, in culmination, what was their experience like? That really helps you, especially in the pilot phase, figure out if you want to do it again or what changes you might want to make when you do it again. In building student relationships, I don't think any of this is brand new to what we've already shared today, but discuss your teaching philosophy with the students. Let them know why you're doing a COIL. Why are you piloting this? Why is it beneficial to them? Why is it beneficial to you? Why is it beneficial to the partner that you're working with? And share with them what it really means to engage in a COIL. You might be able to do this by creating some community agreements or classroom norms, we call them, with your students. So they might be expectations for how students should engage with one another, how students should show up and respect differences in the classroom and the online community. But build that in with your students and have the students do it with one another, with your partner's class as well. Again, build opportunities to break the ice, so have students do this a little informally first. And then I have the bullet point about assigning roles again. In terms of modality considerations, so just to give a little synopsis of the difference here, synchronous is often what we think of when we think of meeting at the same date, the same time, and using some sort of video conferencing system like Zoom. If you are going to do something like this, and it is something that might not work for both schedules, consider recording it, but recognize that recording it is not the same as collaborating. So students watching a recording is not the same as collaborating. I think that's important to consider, but making sure that students have access to that recording from both institutions. Students might meet synchronously versus the full course meeting synchronously, and you might be able to leverage some digital tools in those synchronous sessions. So Zoom, for instance, has some digital whiteboards that you might be able to use, and it has breakout rooms so students can actually go and engage. And then they can also record there. So students might meet with their groups and then record that group meeting and submit that as maybe accountability or proof that they met, as a way to scaffold and check in on their overall assessment that they're working towards. But there are a lot of other tools that you can use by just simply sharing your screen and using some sort of digital tool when you're navigating the synchronous sessions. And then we have asynchronous, so this is when students are engaging any time and place that works best for them. I think we see this a lot more in terms of the entire makeup of your COIL course, while students might meet synchronously in their small groups. So asynchronous, the thing I want to point out about asynchronous modality is that both institutions are still using their own learning management systems. So you can't enroll your partner students into your middle course, and they couldn't enroll your students into theirs. We use Canvas, for instance, so those are 2 different learning management systems. So you would still want to upload all of your own content and have your own course in those learning management systems be the same if they're relevant in the COIL context. But there are also some other tools that I'll point out for sharing content. If that feels like a lot to have to share it twice in there and then within another space, we can talk about what that might look like. But then there are also a bunch of other tools for facilitating interactions outside of the LMS, like social annotation tools. I talked about Perusal earlier, or maybe video discussion tools. Gabriella talked about Flipgrid. I think it's now called Flip, but sort of to share videos. Technology, I think, is kind of where a lot of the questions lie, so we'll spend a little bit more time on this one. But I want to emphasize that you should consider the technology that matches with the modality first, and then think about how the technology aligns to the pedagogy, or sort of what the learning process students are experiencing is. So we've divided these up into these categories here, but creating and sharing content, there are specific tools for that purpose. Same thing with student-to-student interactions or discussions, group projects, student-to-student feedback or peer review tools, and then tools specific for presenting and reflecting on learning. I'll share some examples here in a minute. When choosing technologies, someone mentioned GDPR earlier, but it's really important to consider and talk with your partner about any data privacy and storage standards and regulations in your home countries, because they do differ. Some tools might be allowed here that aren't allowed in other countries and vice versa, and so that might just be a challenge that you have to work through a little bit longer than some other areas of designing your COIL experience, but there's got to be a tool out there that will help, so we can think through that too. And then I want to point out that you should recognize that there's a curve for learning technology. I think we've all experienced that with some technology tool in the past, but while you have a curve to learning, so do your students. And the last thing you want to do is spend all of your class time teaching them how to use the tool, just so that they can learn. So I will emphasize that most tools have their own knowledge bases of articles or some sort of support, but if you're going to use a tool, make sure that there's a resource out there that teaches them, so you don't also have to teach them how to use the tool. It's really important to adhere to accessibility and inclusivity standards when it comes to technology. Some tools are way better at it than others, and if you have students with specific needs, learning needs or accommodations, you want to make sure that the tool meets that. There might be alternative tools that you can use, but it might take just using an entirely different tool for your entire course that matches that. And you can always consult with learning technologists here about tools that can help kind of align with all of this. This is where I'm going to talk a little bit more into the project that me and my team did a couple years ago now. But what we did is we created a rubric to review technologies and determine which ones are safe when it comes to data storage and sharing, which ones are unsafe, and which ones align better with pedagogy, which ones aren't maybe educational tools but that are being used in educational contexts, and which ones are designed for digital accessibility and which ones just aren't. So what we've done after we reviewed the tools, we've given them a rating on this stoplight rating scale here. So as you can see at the top, we have our red technologies. We have a little statement here that's like, you don't want to use these tools. These aren't educational tools. You might be using them, but if you are, you should be aware what they're doing with your data. And so I heard someone talk about Slack earlier. Slack is on here. It's not a tool designed for education. It's a corporate tool for communication. Teams would be a better one, or there's some other ones that might be able to serve the purpose that you want in Slack, like WhatsApp, group messaging, or Facebook or something like that. Not that Facebook is any better, but there are some red technologies here. Then we've created this middle color, the yellow one. This is kind of the proceed with caution. These aren't the most safe tools, or they're not explicit about what they're doing with their data. And so we've got a little bit of a statement here and then a list of technology tools here. Our standards might be a little bit different than yours. So we might have a technology on yellow here that fits in a different category for the University of Glasgow, and that's totally fine. We've got green technologies. These are the ones that we've kind of said, these are the safest, these are the ones that we're green on. You can go ahead and use these. And then we have this last category down here that's blue. And for us, we wanted to say that these were our enterprise systems. So it doesn't matter what's on their privacy policies. Our institution has gone into some sort of contract with them that's saying the institution is liable for data privacy standards. which is likely what you have with, for instance, Moodle. Your institution has some sort of agreement with Moodle, whether it's safe or not. They have navigated something in the contract. So I like to bring this up because our institution is a Microsoft campus, while other institutions are Google campuses. Our institutions that don't use Google, we don't have a contract with them. They might take your data and sell it to third parties. That doesn't mean that another institution that has a contract with Google, that's going to happen to them. So there's a lot of nuance here. But we wanted to create something for our institution internally that we can communicate which technologies we're promoting more than others. I'm actually going to go into this website, and this is always a little confusing. Give me a second here. So we built the website to be a little bit more interactive for users. Here on the website, we've got a link to our publication. We talk about the project, what our goals were, and then we've got that Spotlight rating system. I like to show this because each one of these tools links out. So if I open this into a new tab, it links out to a guide that explains the tool a little bit. We've got some teaching strategies about how you might use the tool, some information on the functionality of the tool. We've got the score of our accessibility rating, so we also created a rubric to review for accessibility out of 5 stars. So this one, for instance, is 4.5 out of 5 stars. Explains what it can do there. We've got some resources. We have a statement on whether or not the university covers cost or not. We have links to some of their own tech support, and then we have some research here. The research might be directly related to the tool or the use of the tool, so like pedagogically, what research for, why you should use tools for collaboration, for example, or something like that. And then we've got the rating here. So you all have access to this website, which means you all have access to all of these. So if you're just exploring tools and you want to learn a little bit about them in a very quick snippet way, you can learn more here. But then we also took it a step further and we wanted to align the tools to sort of the different pedagogical groups that I mentioned earlier. So we've got tools for supporting collaboration here, which you can learn more about. We've got tools for creating and sharing content, for formative and summative assessment, for presenting and reflecting on learning. We link up to some AI tools for learning and then interactive tools for engagement. But this resource can be really helpful if you're like, I have this idea, I want to do this thing, but I don't even know where to start. For choosing a technology that aligns, this might help you. Like I said, this is geared towards our faculty at the University of Denver, but I think can be applicable to other institutional contexts as well. Any questions about this project or how to use this tool or anything like that before I move on?
It looks great.
Yeah.
It's very small, so if you really have
Yeah.
a chance to look at it closer up.
Yep, it's hard. It's always hard to show here, right? Zoom in a little bit, but yeah. Let me get back to the slides.
I think that's one of those we have an agreement situations.
Yeah, it tends to be that way. And we really started this project because we were being told by our IT office, hey, tell faculty they can't use this certain tool. I'm in the Office of Teaching and Learning, so we support faculty in their teaching in pedagogy, and we were like, we don't even know what tools are learning, and there's academic freedom, and so there was just too much weirdness there that we were like, what if we create a resource? It was us also learning how to read privacy policy documents. There's a lot of jargon in there, and then figuring out how to communicate that back to folks. It also helped kind of promote the use of technology by saying like, hey, we'll do this back work for you, and you just have to use the tools now, or learn how to use them.
Would you need any sort of feedback from us on how that works for us, or how we think about it that will help you for the development?
Yes, we will take any feedback. So it's now been in use for a couple of years now. I will say it doesn't include every technology out there, so if you all are using a tool, and especially from a COIL context, that's like really, really awesome, definitely reach out to me because I would love to include that here, do a review. If you're also just curious, I can share the rubric with you so you can apply the rubric to some tools that you might use. And I actually believe we have those somewhere on the website already, but I'm happy, you all have my email now, and I'll make sure to share that again. But I'm happy to take any feedback from you all on how it works, especially as you navigate conversations with your partners. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to just give you some tools that you could walk away going to explore that will that are options for COIL. And so the first one is Wakelet. That's the one that I shared all of our resources with you today. I'm going to go back to the website here to show you. But in the Wakelet, this is what it looks like. You can paste URL web addresses, you can paste just text-based content or images, or you can upload PDFs. So I've uploaded PDFs of all of the slides from today. I've uploaded links to the websites and then PDFs of all of those documents that I talked about, so the rubrics here. So this is a really great way for you to share content between you and your partners. So the students can share the PDFs to their essays that they worked on here so that both courses can see them. Students can share resources here. So this is just another really easy tool to use for sharing content. I will say I'm using a free version. I don't know how many spaces you get in the free version, but you can always delete and restart the next quarter or term. But this is a great one to explore. Let's get back to this. So Wakelet, great tool for sharing content. Perusal is the one I mentioned earlier. This is a social annotation tool. Definitely check it out. This one is a free open access resource. Again, I don't know how these work in different countries, but I know the UK and the US tend to have very similar tools available to them, so these should be available to you all. Flip is that video discussion tool. It's really designed around short videos, so like 1 to 2 minute clips. This is a perfect tool for students to introduce themselves asynchronously first. Like, hey, here's who I am, here's where I live, here, this is what I'm into in my social life and things like that, but a really low stakes way for them to engage. It can also be a way for them to check in with you if they're working on a project over several weeks. So they could share the 1 to 2 minute clip of where they're at with their project, what questions they might have, and you can engage with them, or students can comment to one another. So they could use this in their small groups, they could use this in the entire course. You just create it on the web and you share links so that both institutions have access to it. But this is a really cool tool for that purpose. Padlet, I think someone mentioned Padlet earlier, but this is a really great sort of digital bulletin board tool. There's a couple different frameworks that you can use that they offer for the different types of threads that you can have, but it's another great way to just collaborate sort of in that online asynchronous space. Parlay is a newer one to me, but I thought it was really cool because it has an AI integration where you can plug in your course and it can come up with discussion questions for you. So you could put in your learning outcomes related to your course and your learning outcomes related to COIL, and it might come up with some class discussion board that then both students can interact with in a text-based discussion. And then I have Microsoft Office, because there's a whole suite within Microsoft that has a bunch of different tools that you can use. So PowerPoints can be collaborative and shareable, Word documents can be collaborative and shareable, and so on. But this tends to be what we see a lot of students use primarily when collaborating on essays or things like that. Any questions about tools?
So all of these, you will have to have the university license, right?
Well, it depends on if your university has a license.
Yeah.
Some tools your university might not have a license for, and there are free options that you can use.
Because I think if you use Padlet, it has like a maximum of 4 different questions to use.
That's
what
what
you
it's
have like 4 Padlets and then you have to take them off.
Yeah.
Or you can archive them
Yeah.
and it will let you have more. So you don't even have to
Okay.
delete them.
That's what I've heard.
Good.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge with navigating free tools, is just the limitations. Yeah, but if you make one and you're done with it for the week, you can let students know, hey, we're deleting it after the week so that we can create a new one for the following week. Then you could save it sort of as like a screen grab or something for yourself.
I mean, I suppose this is a GDPR question, isn't it? I mean, could we, if they're not, because I've heard pilot is, if we say we're only going to use it for X amount of time and then delete everything, I suppose that's something I would need to look into, when you're, because
You can also do it all anonymously, so I think there's a
Yeah.
lot to do with how you've got to set it. As long as people don't log in,
yeah.
and it's completely anonymous, and I think it really depends what you're asking them to put on it. If it's just discussion or feedback, that's a bit different from, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, because what you can do is you can download it as a PDF, and then you can put presumably the PDF onto your Moodle,
Yeah, that's what.
delete the
Yeah.
actual thing. If it's,
Yeah. Some of the things that we learned when we were creating our rubric were sort of there were levels of safety concerns, and so the biggest concern is what personally identifiable information are students sharing. So first step, do they have to create an account or can they just use it? If they don't have to create an account, it's not saving any personally identifiable information. So that's just the first flag that you can think of when you're using a new tool. The second one is if they do have to create an account, what are they having to put in there? If they just have to put in their email and their name, and it doesn't even matter if they put in their real name or not, but their email and their name, maybe even their date of birth, it's a little bit less identifiable. It still does have some identifiable information, and that's something that your institution can declare what's more risky than others. But as soon as they have to start putting in things like their address, or some additional information, then that's a less safe tool. So if you were to go create an account and you would just see what it collects for yourself, that's a good indicator of what it might be collecting for your students. But those tools that don't even have to have students log in or create an account are going to be the safest tools in terms of what you're doing with their data. So that's just kind of, a good way to learn for yourself, but then I would recommend checking in with your instructional technologist here. I have a couple of final notes here, just to kind of wrap up some of the things that we've talked about today, and then I'll talk about what you can expect if you were interested in partnering with a faculty member at DU, University of Denver. So first, I would recommend starting with the class or content you're already familiar teaching with. I definitely would recommend piloting. It's really great that your university is supporting the offer of a pilot, and if you're not quite ready to pilot yet, I'd recommend piloting ideas in your class already, like using new tools or having your class be a little bit more collaborative in nature around those tools, just to see if it's something that you can manage doing in a cross-cultural context. Gathering feedback from your students during and after the experience is really critical, especially during that pilot phase, to learn from before you want to officially launch a COIL. Recognize that you're engaging in your own intercultural development, so there might be some things that you need to do personally as you're navigating, collaborating with someone from another context as well. Give yourself some grace for that and lean into the confidence as you're navigating the support for that. The intercultural inventory that I mentioned earlier is a resource online that you can use, and it sort of helps you self-assess where you're at in sort of global contexts, and it can help you feel a little bit more confident or navigate specific strategies for your own development before feeling more confident. So recommend checking that out. Definitely seek support as you're navigating this journey. So it sounds like there's support built in here at the university when it comes to designing courses in general or navigating pedagogy. And then connect with me if you're interested in learning more about the University of Denver partnerships. I did want to highlight kind of what that partnership might look like. So first we have a link here to an open access module on COIL. It basically covers everything we talked about today, but there might be some resources in there that I didn't highlight here just because the context didn't match. But this is a free, this is part of our partnership with SUNY COIL in New York, saying this is what we will contribute. It's this open course, free. It's not interactive because of the way it's built out. It's more like a website, just a ton of resources there But then if you were to partner with the University of Denver, faculty member, we are launching a brand new 6-week online course that you and your partner would go through together, and it supports each stage of designing your COIL experience. So it's got resources, it's got checkpoints to meet, it's got activities that you can do, it's got questions to help you ask your partner if it's something that you've never done before or haven't thought about before. So that should be a really unique experience, and hopefully it should feel supportive so that after that 6 weeks, you feel ready to go do a COIL. So can answer more questions about that if you're interested. We also invite anyone to our Summer Institute. We just had it a couple weeks ago, so next summer we'll have it again, and it's usually a 1, and sometimes it's a 2-day sort of summer school on what COIL is, and a ton of opportunities through that as well. And then there are resources here at the University of Glasgow and at the University of Denver. But then there's also just resources on the web from different groups like SUNY COIL and things like that. Some of them are free, some of them have small or maybe large charges, but there's a lot out there. So there's my email if you need it. Definitely reach out, especially if you're interested in more collaborations with the University of Denver. But thank you all so much for having me. This was a really great day.